Hi. Maybe let's get started and hopefully people will start joining in.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah. My name is Akshay Prabhudesai, and I have been running Indic Forum in Bay Area for last few years. Indic Forum is an organization um, that's dedicated to build a community around Indic values and scholarship. We have been organizing many events that involve authors, speakers, and experts for last few years. And since COVID, everything has moved fully online, which has been actually better with people all around the world being able to speak to the audience directly. Um, so today we have with us Mr. Venkatesh Rangan, who is a finance professional based in Mumbai. He's very passionate about Indian history, medieval Indian history. He's author of books, research papers, and concept notes in various unsung and untold stories of our past. His current work that we are going to discuss today is based on around 60 original Sanskrit Prakrit manuscripts and inscriptions along with Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic texts. This book that we are going to discuss today is Age of Pi and Prose. This is a very interesting book in a sense. It looks at very specific 3 decades of Indian history and 3 people, and then it traces how these people and their actions might have shaped the whole modern world that we know today, including influence on Europe and China. So this is going to be an hour-long presentation. I will not take more time. I'll give the floor to author. Just one note that this presentation is being recorded and it will be put on YouTube and various other platforms. We will also field questions. So we request people to ask their questions in the comment chat. That way, eventually we can compile, and based on how much time we have, we can take up those questions. So Venkatesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks Akshay, and a thank you to Indic Forum and Rajiv Verma ji for helping organize this event. So what I'll do is I'll just share a presentation which I've made, which will just help me explain my book. So everyone can see this, see the presentation on the screen, right?
It's still loading, I think.
Sure. So I'll start right now.
Yes, we can see this.
Sure. So just to start, so this presentation is on my book called The Age of Pi and Prose. So this book narrates the events in the lives of 3 ancient Indian personalities, and in a span of 30 years. So it just takes 30 years in Indian history, in ancient Indian history, and narrates the events in the lives of these 3 Indian personalities and how they helped shift or they helped transform several aspects of world history. So how human history was actually transformed by these 3 Indians in these 30 years. So let me, without much ado, get into who these 3 heroes are, and I will introduce them by using the original Sanskrit verses which were used to describe them in that particular period itself. So introducing our first hero, Rajani Rajaniti Chaturi, Chatura Mikhalaya Bhuvo Nayaki Shasati, Gupta Vansha Deepaka, Khuna Parasika Kirata, Sarvarajo Cheta, Sarvatra Vijayah, Mahayodha, Param Bhataraka, Param Bhagvata, Maharaja Dhiraja, Buddha Gupta Vikramaditya, Chatur Samudra Shasani Chakravarti, Prithvim Prashasati. So, my first hero, as the Sanskrit verse has introduced, is called Buddha Gupta Vikramaditya. He is described in this verse as being an expert in politics, Rajniti Chaturi, being the Bhugamandal Nayak, the hero of the entire earth, Huna Parasika, Sarvarajo Cheta, who has uprooted the invaders of the Huns and the Persians, and who stands in the river Sindhu as a pratihara or as a defender for both the nation and the dharma. And one whose fame has reached the 4 oceans, Chatur Samudrasya Shasana Chakravarti, and who has become a great Chakravarti, and he rules this earth, Prithvim Prashasati. Now, Vikramaditya is a very popular, legendary name in our traditions. He's known as a paragon for kingly virtue, a paragon for justice, bravery, valor, etc. Now, historically speaking, actually, the persona of Vikramaditya, who's there in our legends and our stories, is actually the combination of the personality of 4 historic emperors. One, Malavesha Vikramaditya, who initiated the Vikram Samvat. Second, Chandragupta Vikramaditya, who lived around the 4th century to early 5th century CE. Skandagupta Vikramaditya, who lived around the mid 5th century CE. And finally, the 4th and the final great Vikramaditya, which is Buddhagupta Vikramaditya, who lived in the period which I am going to talk about. So the 4th great Vikramaditya, he's who forms the main crux of one of the 3 heroes of my book. Who's the second hero? He's a very well-known name, especially among Indians. Pranipatye kamne kam kam satyam devatam param brahmam arya bhatta srini gadati ganitam kalakriyam golam. So, having pranipata, taking reverence from the Satyadev Parabrahman, Aryabhat presents to the world Ganitam, the sciences of mathematics, Ganitam, Golam, the cosmic sphere, and Kalakriyam, so the Kala, the reckoning of time itself, the explanation of Kala or time itself. So that is Aryabhat, who, as we will see later in this presentation and also in my book, laid the foundations of several pillars of modern mathematics and also propounded several innovative theories in science. So Kulacharya Aryabhatta. My third hero, Saraswati Datta Vara Prasada Shreya Subandhu Sujanaika Bandhu, the one who has received from goddess Saraswati the Varadan, and as a Varadan, as a blessing from goddess Saraswati, has transferred that as a prasad to his readers and to his admirers. That great literary writer, that great author who invented or who actually was an expert in the art of prose, in the art of slasha, which is having a sentence subject to multiple or dual interpretations. Okay, that Subandhu, who is the Bandhu or the brother of Sujana, of good, just, and noble folk. That is our third hero, who is Subandhu. Subandhu is also called Pratyekshara, Slesha Maya Prabandha, or for each and every word, who can frame a sentence in such a way that there can be dual interpretation. So imagine reading an entire book, but reading 2 stories in the same book, right? The sentences remain the same, but based on a perspective and based on interpretation, you can read 2 fully different stories. So that is actually what Subandhu was. In the name of Subandhu, several institutions and universities were set up across the world. So he was not just a man in himself, he was an institution in himself across Cambodia, Thailand, across the Indian subcontinent. For over 1,300 years, there were different gurukulas, ghatikas, universities, schools, etc., which just functioned on this one man and his theories. So imagine if you have a Subandhu Institute of Technology somewhere in the Southeast Asia, or you have a Subandhu University of Literature somewhere in, let's say, in India. So that is exactly what happened. Now, how did I really evolve the narrative around these 3 heroes, basically? So I have actually referred to around 52 original Sanskrit and Prakrit manuscripts. 2 of them are extremely rare. The Bhatta Siddhantika of Aryabhatta from the Bhagwat Singh Ji and the Mansingh manuscript repository in Mumbai, and the original Sanskrit Vasavadatta Subandhu from the Ananda Ashram in Pune. So these 2 have been extremely rare manuscripts I've referred. There are also other manuscripts I've referred to. Also 2 inscriptions in terms of the Bhadrakaya stone inscription in Bihar and the Damodarpur copper plate inscription for the first time have been translated and interpreted in this particular book. Other than this, I have also referred to Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, and Pahlavi, ancient Persian literature. Overall, 222 sources have been referred by me. The details are given in my book. So what does my book actually say? My book is based on a theory in history called the theory of inflection points. So what this theory says is that history is essentially cyclical. Human society has had great advancements in the past from a technological and economic standpoint. However, these advancements later led to a social collapse. And after a period of social collapse, there was a rebirth of societies. So history essentially follows in what is called a cyclical fashion. Okay. Now, what are those particular centuries which lead to the rebirth of a society after destruction? These are called as the inflection points. Now, Western historians will tell you that the inflection points for Europe would be the Renaissance or the Industrial Revolution. In ancient India itself, there were several inflection points. The Vedic age, which was the age of great intellectual development, was also an inflection point. The age of the Gangetic Valley urbanization, which led to Magad imperialism. The Sangam age in the Kaveri Delta. So all these were different inflection points in history. The point is, or the question is, can we find a particular bunch of decades in our history which serve as a common inflection point, a common foundation for all the civilizations and countries of the world, whether it be Europe, whether it be China, whether it be Africa, whether it be Mesoamerica? Can there be a common point, the first step which is taken, the first step to lay the foundation for the modern world? Can we identify that? So I have identified that in my book. So my entire book's thesis is based on that. I have identified that in my book as just being 30 years from 3577 Kali Yuga Samvat to 3606 Kali Yuga Samvat, which translates to 476 AD to 505 AD in the Gregorian calendar. So just in these 30 years, the actions of these three heroes, Buddhagupta, Vikramaditya, Aryabhatta, and Subandhu, laid the first foundation of what we call modern world. They led to a rebirth of different societies and across world civilization. Now, why do I say that? It's a very huge claim I'm making, right? Is it unsubstantiated? Is it just rhetoric? So let us pause a bit and look at world history for some time. 500 AD or the late 5th century AD was a period of disruption, war, and chaos across the world. In 476 AD, the Roman Empire was overthrown by Odoacer the Goth, who were called the barbarians by the Romans. The entire Greco-Roman civilization or the Greco-Roman Empire, which had dominated ancient Europe, was wiped out without a trace. In 500 CE, ancient Europe ended. The dark ages of Europe, as the Italian humanist Petrarch would later comment on, the dark ages of Europe started. It would take several centuries, up to the 13th century, for a rebirth of Europe to actually happen. Similarly, in West Asia, in Persia, the Sasanian Empire was decimated by the Hephthalites or the White Huns in the Battle of Balak in 484 AD. This totally destroyed the old Sasanian order. The Persians were forced to pay tribute. And finally, a rebirth of Persian society happened in the 6th century under a great emperor called Khusrau I. In Mesoamerica, in the great Mayan civilization, again 500 AD acts as a dividing line. The mid-classical Mayan civilization was wiped out in warfare between the Calakmul and the Tikal kingdoms. It took under a century for a rebirth of the Mayan society under the late classical Mayan civilization. In Africa, also 500 AD is a period of war. The Aksum or the in the modern day Ethiopia and Abyssinian region was in a constant warfare with the Himarite kingdom of Yemen. In the Far East, it was a period of disintegration in China, the period of 5 kingdoms, the period of a northern and southern dynasty. Northern China under the foreign Wei dynasty. In southern China, the Nanki dynasty was embroiled in political intrigues, coups, and bloodshed. This lasted till the 7th century when a rebirth of Chinese society happened under the Tang Empire, which is called the Golden Age of China. Now, if I pause a bit and I just look at a few decades before the rebirth of each of these different societies, what I find is there was a great influx of Indian ideas in each of these civilizations. Okay, as a prelude to the Sui Tang Age in China, for example, there is a whole century of what I have termed as a century of Indian mentorship between 480 to 570 AD. What does this mean? If we look at Tibetan, Chinese, and Tocharian manuscripts, we find that around 480 CE, Indian emperors appointed mentors, statesmen, philosophers who would guide the Nanki Chinese emperor. And in return, as per a Tibetan source, the Chinese emperor gave a part of his revenue. I'll go in more details on this later in the presentation. So effectively, we find this century of Indian mentorship, several ideas such as Dhyana, Yoga, Jyotisha, Ganita, and the Vikramaditya Personam were introduced in China in this period. In fact, I'll also be showing an ancient Chinese painting, which is very beautifully depicts this whole concept of mentorship. Similarly, in Korea, the unification of the Korean peninsula in the 7th century was a sensational event. It was led by the Silla offensive, or the Silla kingdom. Now, interestingly speaking, in the 6th century, exactly after 500 CE, we find a huge influx of Indian ideas into Korea. In fact, the largest Sanskrit institution in the Far East, the Gaeul University in Korea, was established in this period. This particular university translated no less than 72 volumes of Sanskrit texts in a period of 25 years. So that is the most rapid translation of any foreign language in any country in the Far East in the ancient period. So that is the extent of the influence of Sanskrit and of Indian culture in Korea. There were several other aspects which will again come to later in the presentation. Japan, the Asuka period started with the dominance of the Soga clan. This again coincided with an influx of Indian ideas, Yogacara, Dhyana, and Sanskrit especially. In fact, Sanskrit became adopted as a language of the elite. In fact, in the 8th century, when an Indian monk, Bodhisena, arrived in Japan, he found that a chief priest and a chief chamberlain of the imperial Japanese nobility actually welcomed him in chaste Sanskrit. So there was an influx of ideas which also happened in Japan. In Persia, in parallel to Khusrau I's reforms of the Sasanian Empire, you find a recurring tale of an Indian personality called Devasaram. So there are some Pahlavi legends that say Devasaram introduced chess. Some legends say Devasaram gave political governance, advice in political governance to Khusrau. Some legends say that Devasaram actually brought in Indian medicine to Persia. So we have recurring legends of an Indian personality, of an Indian king called Devasaram, exactly when Khusrau I was actually reorganizing the Sasanian Empire. Finally, in Europe, I spoke earlier about how in 13th century, a slow and steady rebirth of European society started. Essentially, in this period between 1202 and 1270 AD, we find 4 great intellectuals across Europe: Italy, Sweden, and France. So across southern, northern, and western Europe, who were fascinated by a certain group of Arabic texts which expounded Indian mathematical principles. We'll again come to details later in this presentation. So what we are finding is we're finding an extremely coincidental Indian hand before each of these decades. Now, it is not just looking at world history. Archaeological, epigraphic, and numismatic evidence show us that in the 6th century was a great dividing line in terms of economic, technological, and social transformation in the Indian subcontinent, reaching out to other parts of Asia also. For example, the inventions laid in these 30 years led to the largest reclamation of wasteland, desert, mountains, forest land into agricultural land for any period in human history. Okay. Now, how did this happen? This happened because we find evidences of large lift irrigation projects being implemented in place. The first epigraphic evidence or inscriptions of this we get in the early 6th century. Now, what do we mean by this? Now, in today's world, we have different kinds of irrigation, right? We have dam irrigation. We also have lift irrigation. When you lift the waters of a river from a lower elevation to a higher elevation, above a plateau, above a mountain, etc. Classic examples are the Colorado Lift project in the United States or the Kaleshwaram project in Telangana, etc. So in ancient times, about 1,500 years ago, we have evidences of a very large lift irrigation project across central India, okay, where no less than 10 lifting devices or Raja Araghattas with a height of about 100 and 150 feet each were used to lift the waters of the Ken, Betwa, and other rivers up over 1,000 feet. We also find archaeological evidence of a third wave of urbanization which happened in India in that period. So as per historians, there were 3 waves of urbanization in India. The first wave was in the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization. Second wave was in the Magadh, Sangam period of our civilization. And the third wave actually happened during the 5th or the 6th century, around starting from 500 CE. Now, the uniqueness of this phase of our urban culture was that it basically led to a revival of several lost cities. Now, if you look at our Puranic Itihasa, there were several cities which got lost when the Kali Yuga actually started. That is what the Puranic Itihasa says. For example, Hastinapura got devoured by floods. Prague, Jyotisha, and Kamarupa got conquered by the forests. Sthaneshwara near Kurukshetra was completely desolate because of the war. So in this period, we find these ancient cities suddenly getting revived and becoming flourishing centers. In terms of per capita economic output, if we look at the rise in per capita economic output in constant terms, from 500 CE down to under 600 years, we find that because of the economic policies and reforms of these 30 years, we find a massive structural increase in per capita economic growth. In these 600 years, the Indian per capita income growth grew double of what Europe grew during the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution put together. So if we compare the 600 years from 500 to about 1200 CE, and you compare Europe from about 1300 to about 1900 CE, you find the Indian per capita economic growth was double of that. Okay. Now, if we look beyond economic aspects, scientifically speaking, the first mathematical equations which related space and time in the same dimension in human history were evolved in these 30 years. And I'm talking about mathematics. I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about literature. I'm actually talking about very pure, short mathematical equation explaining the law of physics, relating space and time in a common dimension. We know of the famous Einsteinian-Minkowski space-time framework, which came in the 21st century. This is a very unique space-time framework, which came about 1,500 years earlier. Mathematical theorization of interstellar space. Now, throughout civilizations, whether it be Babylon, it be China, whether it be Greece, whether it be Rome, there's a very strong astronomical tradition. But astronomers always observed. They saw the skies above. They recorded planets. They recorded conjunctions. They recorded stars. None of them theorized on what lies beyond what we see. What lies? Are there some common laws across the universe? Can I mathematically theorize certain laws across the universe? It was here in India in these 30 years that this first mathematical theorization of interstellar space came. This is a sensational and unprecedented achievement. We also find that this was the years when pre-existing Indian decimal systems were reordered and standardized in particular rules. And then from these rules spread to other corners of the world, laying the foundation of a modern number system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the basic number system, which is a well-known fact. But along with these number systems which traversed across the world, foundations of mathematics like root factorization, the theory of inversion, indeterminate equations, remainder theorem, the rule of three, which is a ratio proportionality theory, and arithmetic and algebraic recursion also spread to other corners of the world. In terms of scientific, the great correction, which is called the 3.5 method of correction, which was evolved by Aryabhatta, which is basically telling us that planetary orbits are not perfectly circular, right? So you need to perform certain orbital corrections over what you see to planets so that you arrive at the true position of the planet. So there is a Prati Mandala or a true orbit, and there is a Kaksya Mandala. Now we have to match the mean orbit and the true orbit of the planet to arrive at the true position of the planet. To give you an example, in modern days when satellites are launched, and if a satellite doesn't reach its particular orbit, scientists, whether it be in ISRO or it be in NASA, etc., they perform what is called as orbital maneuvers. They exactly fire the engines at a certain angle so that the satellite reaches its desired object. This is based on certain mathematical calculations on the particular correction to be evolved. So a similar kind of mathematical calculation to correct the planetary position to arrive at its true position was performed this period. This is the first time this particular approach was very unique to India and for the first time performed in the Jyotisha tradition in India. Also, a dual theory was proposed in these 30 years, one of a geocentric Earth and one of a system of planets with reference to Sun. This second alternative theory was taken forward by followers of Aryabhatta later on in later centuries to evolve a quasi-heliocentric model where Sun could be the center of the solar system. Also, the rotation of the Earth on its axis got official sanction. So a lot of these details I'll be giving later in this presentation and are also there in my book. So I'm right now just summarizing it to give a context. There was also a great literary transformation. I mentioned this earlier. The first, longest running, and the earliest extant prose literary movement in the world was established here. In fact, the earliest surviving original novel or fiction novel is actually the Vasavadatta by Subandhu. So all the other great works actually works in verse or works in, or wherever we also find prose works, they are works of administration, works of empire building, etc. The old Greek stories which we find were particularly stories which were told of let's say mythological beings or mythological characters. Many of them only survive in later works. But it is only in Subandhu's work that we find the original text still extant to us in its complete original form, which is a fictional novel completely written in prose. There were several other literary traditions which spread during this period. Finally, it was also a period of great industrial revolution. Now, there is a difference between invention and the adoption of that invention. So I may invent a mobile phone, but the masses will only adopt that mobile phone if I can get into mass production of that mobile phone. I bring down the costs and I put down the prices of that mobile phone. So this transition from earlier inventions to mass production actually happened in particular sectors in the Indian economy, as in the 6th century CE, in the 6th century or 500 CE. A classic example is the heavy metal industry. Now, if you look on your left, right, all the great marvels of modern engineering are really based on huge mega engineering structures made out of metal. So look at modern cable-stayed bridges. The picture you have is the port in Normandy in France. In India, you have the Bandra Worli sea link also. You have modern steel frames which are used for construction. Or you have modern metallic buildings, steel buildings, glass buildings. You have the modern metallic buildings which are also used in architecture. Now just imagine that because of the inventions in these 30 years, similar mega structures were raised in the centuries in the centuries between the 6th and 12th century in India. On your right hand side is the cable-stayed pillar of Dhar. Remnants of this still exist in and around the Mandu area in modern-day Madhya Pradesh. In fact, till 1902, as per a black and white photograph, a part of this was still standing till it was dismantled by certain British administrative officials. Now, this mega structure was a cable-stayed pillar, 43 feet in height, 7 tons in weight, held together by 7 cables, all in iron, completely wrought iron, held together by anchors. The smallest anchor was 30 inches high and 20 inches wide. So this was a mega structure. Okay, and the fact that such mega structures could be built means that the production of metal objects had really reached that level of demand and that level of mass production that they could actually be set up. Another classic example is the use of iron beams in construction. The first evidence of this we actually get in the Dashavatar temple during the period of Buddhagupta Vikramaditya. This later expanded to become a mass use of iron beams in construction. To give you an example, in the Gundichi Bari temple of Puri in Orissa, 237 mega beams, 17 to 25 feet in length, and 2.2 to 2.5 tons in weight were used to hold the masonry intact. Very similar to the steel frames which are used in our modern constructions. In the Konark temple, these iron beams actually reached up till 30 feet in height. So the origins of this great technology, we see the first extant evidences we actually see in these 30 years. Yuan Chuan, of a Chinese traveler, actually mentioned entire temples, 10-storied, 100 feet high temples made out of brass. Effectively speaking, a lot of the transformation which I've spoken about, economic, technological, scientific, etc., can be traced to these 30 years. So how did I exactly land in a chronology of this 30 years? Fortunately for me, 2 of my heroes explicitly give their own dates. Aryabhat, in his Aryabhatya, explicitly mentions his birth date in the Kali Yuga Samvat and also mentions how the Kali Yuga Samvat is calculated. By this, we get his birth date as Nirayana Mesha Shankranti of 3577 Kali Yuga Samvat. Now, all of us know that Mesha Shankranti lies somewhere in April. However, as per Professor Kripashankar Shukla, the Mesha Shankranti in 476 AD actually lays somewhere in March 21st. So whatever be the debate, it is between March-April 476 AD that Aryabhat was born. Fortunately for us, around the same time, we have an inscription in Sarnath called the Abhayamitra inscription, which is also dated. It's dated in the Vaisakha Gupta Samvat 157, equivalent to 3577 Kali Yuga Samvat, which translates into 476 AD, exactly a time when also, as per this inscription, Buddhagupta Vikramaditya was coronated. So we get 2 dates as our sheet anchors for a period. So in 476 AD, we find a new emperor in his late 30s who actually was coronated. We find an infant who was born at that same period in the same city. The city was called Kusumapura, the ancient Patliputra. And around the same time, we find a 20-year-something author from the Narmada Valley in Madhya Pradesh, in around modern-day Barwani, starting on a trek to Kusumpura to find his fortune. So 3 different personalities of 3 different generations start their journey around 476 AD. What I'll do now is I'll go year by year in a summarized fashion to explain the great achievements which happened in these periods. Firstly, if you look at the left-hand side, is an actual field study photograph of the Kusumapura ruins. So ancient Patliputra is a very, very ancient city. A suburb of Patliputra in the 5th century was called Kusumapura. It lies to the north of the present ruins of Patliputra in modern-day Patna and Bihar. This photograph you see is the exact spot of the 5th century Kusumpura ruins where Buddhagupta was coronated and Aryabhatta was born. Now, when Buddhagupta was coronated, unfortunately, was a period of great political and intellectual confusion. So politically, there was a huge period of chaos and bloodshed in a decade before which Buddhagupta was coronated. Intellectually, as a Sanskrit inscription tells us, Siddhanta Panchaka Vidyavapi, Durga Virodha Maudhayo, or the sciences of the Pancha Siddhantas, of the Pancha Vidyas, started having Viruddha, self-contradictory results. And the credibility of these sciences actually started becoming lower in the eyes of people. That is because the great ancient wisdom of the Vedic and the Shaladarshana period suddenly started losing their esteem in this period. So a lot of people at that age started looking for saviors. They said, we want an emperor who will consolidate the position, who will protect dharma, who will protect the country, who will unify the country. We need an astronomer, mathematician who will clear this confusion. Tell us what is right. We need an author or a literary writer who will bring the arrogance of the literary circle of Kusumpura down. So people were looking for a savior. At that particular point of time, from the Nalanda University, which you see on the bottom left-hand side, a group of Nastic Buddhist scholars called Vasapandhu launched a direct attack on what they call the Astika schools, or schools which believed, or they were derived from the 4 Vedas, who believed in the infallibility of the Vedas. So Vasapandhu and his group launched a direct attack on this group. So there was huge amount of polarization which was taking place. It was in these trying times that Buddhagupta Vikramaditya ascended the throne. It was also during these trying times that a boy was born in Kusumpura to an immigrant family or a migrant family. So the Bhattas actually were hailed from south of India. They hailed from the south of the Vindhyas, from the Asmaka region. The Bhatta family had migrated to Kusumpura because at that point of time, the Kusumpura Ghatikota University had a very well-renowned astronomical school belonging to the Brahma Siddhanta and also the Surya Siddhanta. So the Bhatta family belonged to the Surya Siddhanta, or the solar school of Indian astronomy. They migrated to Kusumpura, and in Kusumpura they were blessed with a son in April 476 AD, who was called Aryabhatta. As the Sanskrit shloka tells us, Suryam Swayam Kusumapura Bhuvati Kalau tu Bhugo Lavita Kulapa Aryabhatta Vidhanaha. Or when Surya Swayam descended onto Kusumapura as an avatar in the form of Kulapa Aryabhatta to clear the confusions of this world. Now, fortunately for the people of that age, Buddhagupta could consolidate his position within the first 8 years. So between 476 to 484 AD, at a time when Aryabhatta was growing up and enjoying his childhood, Buddhagupta consolidated his position within India. He unified the empire again. From 484 AD onwards, Buddhagupta engaged in several external expeditions. Okay, firstly, the White Huns, who are then a scourge of humanity. So the Huns, the Hunnic Confederacy, were proved to be a mass disruptive force across civilization in the 5th century. Rome and Constantinople trembled in fear and paid tribute to Attila the Hun. A confederate or an allied group of ethnicities called the White Huns became a great menace to Persia, Central Asia, and India. The White Huns decimated the Persians. The mighty Sasanian Empire was forced to pay tribute. Those White Huns amassed for a massive invasion around 484 AD. Now, it is this invasion which was faced by Buddhagupta in 484 CE, and Buddhagupta Vikramaditya could completely destroy this Hunnic invasion. In fact, this was the third time the Gupta Empire had defeated the Huns. So the Huns at that time were something like a military superpower, and the only country in the world where they were defeated not once or twice but thrice was actually in India, and Buddhagupta was the one who defeated them the third time. So parallel to this, Buddhagupta also launched an expedition across the eastern Himalayas into Tibet. We get full details of this in the Damodarpur copper plate grant inscription and in the Busan Chronicles of Tibet, where very clearly the late 5th century has been told as a period where an Indian royalty actually arrived in Tibet and initiated the first dynasty of unified Tibet. Okay, until that time, Tibet was actually broken up into several kind of municipalities. First dynasty of unified Tibet was initiated by an Indian army coming late 5th century CE. It's also a period which is, I would say, validated by an Indian inscription from Bengal called a Damodarpur inscription. This is also a period when we find a very interesting reference in a medieval Tibetan work by Lama Yeshod called the Gyar Yor Chos Ban. In the Gyar Yor Chos Ban, Buddha Gupta, or a Gupta emperor exactly 1000 years after Nirvana of Buddha. So if Buddha's Nirvana was 5th century BC, exactly 1000 years is the 5th century AD. Around that time, a Gupta emperor appointed, as per Lama Yeshod, Sautrantika Acharyas well versed in the sutras in the Nanki court of China. In return, as per this Lama, the Chinese emperor gave a revenue tribute equivalent to 10,000 people carrying their weight in gold. Now, this may be exaggerated. This may or may not be exactly great in details. But the very fact that a completely different source, a Tibetan source, sometime far away in time and place, is actually mentioning such an incident lends credence to the fact that such an incident would have actually happened. And as we shall see, there are also Chinese chronicles during this period which support this. For example, in 484 AD, we have a diplomatic exchange between the Funan kingdom and the kingdom of Nanki in China. Interestingly, in this diplomatic exchange in the Nanki chronicles, both emperors, the Emperor Wu of China and the Funan emperor, express a reverence to Lord Maheshwara or Lord Shiva. This is totally out of the blue. Okay, why should a Chinese emperor and a Funan emperor suddenly talk about Maheshwara? So again, a very interesting, I would say, supporting evidence in that case. This is also a period when Buddhagupta's influence over Malaya or Malaysia is testified by certain Nanki chronicles. For example, as per a certain Nanki annal which has been used by me, a prince of Lang Kia Su, which is a kingdom in Malaysia, took refuge in the court of Buddhagupta. He became completely Indianized. He was reinstated back in his kingdom in Malaya. He named his son as Bhagadatta, which is clearly a Sanskrit name. And this Bhagadatta became the king of Malaya later on after that. We find two Sanskrit inscriptions of the late 5th century in Kedah and Penang in Malaysia, all of them ascribed to Mahanaivika Buddhagupta. So we find different Buddhagupta engaging in different external and military and diplomatic initiatives in this period. He also took the Biruda or the title of Vikramaditya around this time. This is evidenced by two coins which are there in a British museum, one coin which is there in a private collection in Varanasi. Both these coins have Sri Vikrama in their reverse and Buddha in their obverse. Also, a silver coin as per Dr. R.K. Mukherjee, ascribed to Buddhagupta, has the title Avantipati. So the legend of Vikramaditya, which is of him ruling Avanti, so Avantipati and Sri Vikrama, we find Buddhagupta taking all the epithets associated with the legendary Vikramaditya. Now, during this time when Buddhagupta was fighting the Huns, he was spreading his influence in all over Asia. Aryabhatta was having, I would say, an enjoyable time in the Gurukul. He was a child prodigy. He joined the Surya Siddhanta Gurukul. He completed in half the time what his other peers took to complete his education. So by the time he was 13 years of age, Aryabhatta not only completed his Gurukul, he became a Shastri, he also became a Siddhanta Acharya. So generally Siddhanta Acharyas who write encyclopedias on astronomy, who write encyclopedias on particular schools are generally very senior rishis, very old Acharyas. However, Buddhagupta wrote his own Siddhanta, the Aryabhatta Siddhanta, when he was just 13 years of age. This was his first book. His more popular and famous book is his second book, which he wrote 10 years later, which is called Aryabhatta. But his first book is what he called Aryabhatta Siddhanta, written when he was 13 years of age. This book is very popular, especially because it mentions a lot of gadgets or yantras, which Aryabhatta actually developed in his Gurukula. The Japanese Indologist Bai Owashi have actually drawn some of these yantras. The first part of Shanku Yantra, which is used for observing the movement of the sun, is what has been drawn above. The below part is another class of yantras by Aryabhatta, which are basically hydro-powered robotic clocks. Okay, this is my own diagrammatic representation based on my reading of the Aryabhatta Siddhanta. This is a hydro-powered clock with 3 variants as per Aryabhatta. Aryabhatta says there was one variant with a peacock, which told the time. There was one variant with a man who would move and kind of show the time, and one variant with actually a monkey, a karpusha, who would move and show the time. So when he was 13 years of age, Aryabhatta was busy designing several of these really innovative and interesting and I would say esoteric kind of yantras. During that time, however, our third hero, Subandhu, was actually facing a lot of frustrations. Subandhu wanted to enter into the literary circle of Kusumapura, but the Sanskrit literary writers were very arrogant towards him. They didn't allow him to enter. Now, that was a period of time when Buddhagupta Vikramaditya started organizing several intellectual conferences. In these conferences, great Vidvans and Acharyas across disciplines, astronomy, Jyotisha, Ganita, literature, Gadya, Kavya, would assemble at a place and discuss theoretical questions of their science. In one such conference which took place in the city of Ayodhya, Subandhu made a Vada Ghosha. He made an announcement of his dispute, of his Vada, and he rang the bell of dispute, entered and challenged the entire literary council of the Imperial Gupta court and was victorious against them in the subject of Gadya Riti. Because of this, Buddhagupta accepted Subandhu as one of his prime members of the literary council, which is called the primary 13 members of the literary council. Now, once Subandhu was ensconced, Aryabhatta also was out of his Gurukul and wrote a Siddhanta, the great Aryabhatta Siddhanta. Aryabhatta started getting very interested in a topic which was discussed in the intellectual conferences of Buddhagupta. So in these conferences, a very recurring topic was that of Kala or time. There was, at that period of time, there was a great scholar of the Vaisheshika school, which was an atomic school of Indian philosophy called Prashastapada. Prashastapada challenged the Jains into a debate on Kala or time. So the Jain philosophers also told their own version of time. There was a school of thought of Brihatahari. Brihatahari is generally the legend considered to be the elder brother of Vikramaditya. So there was a school of thought of Brihatahari's philosophy on time also. So it is in this great debate which was taking place, Aryabhatta got interested in the concept of time. And he decided, why don't I look at it from a very mathematical and a very scientific perspective? What is exactly Kal? What is exactly time? And what is the relation to space? Now, just to give a context of what time and space holds in physics and generally modern science. Before the 21st century, time was seen as an independent constant. It never influenced any other laws of physics. For example, if I run at a certain speed, okay, I will run at a certain speeds of kilometers per hour. That time unit will not change. 60 minutes will make an hour, 24 hours will make a day. It is not that if I increase my speed beyond a certain level, the time itself will change. Time remains constant. Time remains independent. So all the great writers of the Enlightenment, whether they be Newton or anybody else, differentiated time. Said, let's keep time aside for a moment and let us then study the laws of physics. And that is why you had a duality. You had the laws of large motion of objects, which was covered by the Newton's famous laws of physics, and you had the properties of light, which were covered by Maxwell's electromagnetic models. So this duality continued till the famous annus mirabilis of the early 21st century, Albert Einstein and Hermann Minkowski, and the concept of space-time, which became central to the Einsteinian theory of relativity and led to the revolution of quantum physics we see today. However, 1,500 years before this, Aryabhatta was already trying to unify space and time within a mathematical framework. Aryabhatta started with this great hypothesis. He said, Evam kala vibhaga kshetra vibhaga sthata bhagnat. Or just like the division of time, kala vibhaga, kshetra vibhaga. We're talking of geometric space here, right? Kshetra vibhaga also is caused by a revolutionary motion. Effectively, time and space have to be united by a common causation, which is motion. As per Aryabhatta, if any large object moves, it is impossible to believe that time is independent of it. Now, why did Aryabhatta think of this? Now, Aryabhatta felt that time per se is relative across the universe. Okay. Now, he expressed this in a certain law, which you can call as a law of Akasakaksya. He said, if you take the total orbital distance of a planet, you take the total number of revolutions of a planet, you could equate them together to find the total distance of the Akasakaksya, or the total circle of all the orbits of the planets I see in the sky, in the Akasa. Now, there's obviously a space beyond that. But if I have my reference point in Earth, and if I want to calculate the great extent to which I can see, I can do that through the distance of a planet, the revolution of a planet. Now, what does it exactly mean? It means that through this sphere, what I'm seeing in the Akasakaksya, time shares a certain relation across space. Now, this concept of time also changes. So what Aryabhatta said is that time on Earth is very different than time on Jupiter, which is very different than time on Saturn. Right? So what Aryabhatta did is Aryabhatta calculated the entire Jovian calendar. How would a calendar look like if I was in Jupiter? How would the years look like? How would Earth years be related to a Jupiter's year? Now, based on this, Aryabhatta did several calculations. You can see on your right-hand side in center here, he related cosmic speed, time, cosmic distance together in several mathematical equations which are given in my book. He also calculated sidereal days for different planets. Interestingly, if you look at Aryabhatta's calculation of these days or these years for planets, they near perfectly match the sidereal days calculated by modern astronomers. So to give you an example, one Jupiter's year is equal to 4,332.27 Earth days as per Aryabhatta. The modern calculation is 4,332.5887. For Saturn, Aryabhatta's calculation is 10,766.06. The modern calculation is 10,759.201. So in simple terms, what are we saying? So 365 days make an Earth year. About 4,332 days make a year in Jupiter. So let's assume there were two twins, okay, and they got separated at birth. One twin grew up in Earth and one twin grew up on Jupiter. The same time when the twin on Earth, when a brother on Earth celebrates his 11th birthday, his brother in Jupiter is still a baby of just 1 year old. He's just celebrating his first birthday. So time is basically relative. And if time is basically relative, Aryabhatta said that time cannot be linear. You cannot have a past, present, and future. What the Enlightenment thinkers actually assumed that there would be time is linear, time proceeds. There is a past, a present, there's a future. Aryabhatta said, no, that is not possible. Now just think of it in this way. If I look at the sky, my vision has to travel at a certain speed, right? That's a certain speed of light. So effectively speaking, the moon I'm seeing in my night sky is not the present day moon of 2022. It is actually the moon of the past. Because by the time light reaches there, a lot of years have already passed. So I am effectively looking at the past when I'm looking at the sky. So as per Aryabhatta's scheme of things, time is relative across the universe. What may be present for me on Earth may be past somewhere else in the universe, or maybe future somewhere else in the universe. So the way to represent time is not a straight line. The way to represent time is a circle, an infinitely shaped object, which has 2 points in it, Dussama and Sussama. Now, as per Aryabhatta, there would be points in time, okay, because time is Ananta as per Aryabhatta. But there is a point where the imaginary time stops and the Kala Vibhaga starts. So point where the laws of physics no longer hold. Now, in the modern, let's say the modern, I would say physics, writers such as Stephen Hawking have called this as a point of singularity. But there's a very big difference between the point of singularity of the modern physicists and the Dussama of Aryabhatta. As per modern physics, before the Big Bang, before this universe was created, there was a point in which laws of physics didn't hold. That was a point of imaginary time. When imaginary time stopped, the Big Bang was created, motion started, and real time was created. As per Aryabhatta, you cannot just assume a singular point of disarmament. The point of such a point of singularity keeps occurring again and again in millions, billions, and trillions of years. As per Aryabhatta, this concept of disarmament is also linked to the expansion and the contraction of the universe. And to give an example, Aryabhatta gave an example of the earth. As per Aryabhatta, the earth expands and contracts in a certain period of time. Aryabhatta called this the Yuga of Brahma, because he felt that there's a different Yuga in Jupiter, there's a different Yuga in the different planets. So there needs to be a Yuga beyond our Earth Yugas, beyond the Kali Yuga, Satyug, Treta Yuga, etc. That is a Yuga which defines when this Disarma comes into place. He traced the geological evolution of the Earth's sphere to that point. And that point comes exactly in 431 million years ago, 2.6 billion years ago, and 4.78 billion years ago. Now, as per modern earth sciences, all these periods were related to mass extinctions or creations. The earth was created 4.54 billion years ago as per modern earth sciences. There was a transition from the Archean to the Proterozoic period 2.5 billion years ago. And there was a transition from the Ordovician to the Silurian, a mass extinction event which happened 450 million years ago. As per Aryabhatta, the next such period of mass extinction, or let's say a great disorder, will take place 1.74 billion years hence from now. So for all those who think that there's a great period of destruction which is happening, as per Aryabhatta, no, you still have 1.74 billion years to go before a great destruction happens. Now, Aryabhatta was dealing with very huge numbers when he was actually looking at the space and time. The largest number, for example, dealt by Aryabhatta is 1247472052600. That is 12,474 billion 720 million 5,26,000. Now, this is 10 raised to 17, extremely large numbers. In no other civilization of the world where such large numbers being quantified and actually operated on. So obviously, Aryabhatta wanted certain standardized rules of numeration to help him perform these calculations. Now, all across the world at that point of time, none of the numeral systems were actually adopted for this particular kind of operations, whether it be ancient Egypt, Babylon, even the hand system of counting rods, or ancient Greece or ancient Rome. You needed 5 prerequisites for having such a numeration system. 1, a decimal place, a place value, a use of a mathematical value of 0, ability to handle large operations, 10 raised to 17, 10 raised to 18, standardization across. So your written characters should be the same as what you count. So your mathematician should understand 1 and 2, just the way your author or a writer also understands 1 and 2. So none of these had all these 5 together. Now in India, even before Aryabhatta, right from the time of the earliest Vedas, there was a decimal system in place. For example, in the Rig Veda, we have numbers such as Ekadasha, Dvadasha, Sahasra. So these decimal systems were mentioned in the Rig Veda. Now, during the time of the great codification of Sanskrit language by Panini in his Ashtadhyayi, Panini used a concept called Varga Avarga, which was actually a concept also used by the mathematicians of the period. What does Varga or Avarga mean? All our alphabets can be broken down into alphabets with similar characteristics, where there's temporary stoppage of air in pronunciation. Ka, kha, ga, gha, na, etc. This form what is called a Varga letters. The Avarga are those which are outliers, okay, where the momentary stoppage of air doesn't occur. So Panini used this concept. The mathematicians of that age used Varga as what is called square, the area of a square, and numbers which can multiply themselves. So basically squares. So this concept of Varga was there in this up till the 6th century BC. After the 6th century BC, huge chaos descended in the different Gurukulas and the Ghatikas. Different acharyas interpreted this Varga concept differently. Some of them started evolving 9 different place value systems. Some started evolving 5 place value systems. Some started interpreting Varga to be in every place and not the alternate place. So there was a huge amount of confusion. How do I use this Varga concept in my number system? This resulted in the Brahmi numerals, as we can see from the Ashokan inscriptions, being totally different than the numerals used by the mathematicians. So as we can see from the Isha Upanishad, the Pingala Sutra, the Vishnu Dharma Uttara Purana, the Lalita Vistara and Loka Vibhaka, the mathematicians use a decimal form of system. But as we can see from the Brahmi inscription of Ashoka or the other period of inscriptions, the other people in the society used the written language of Brahmi was not completely aligned with this. So in 476 CE, there was a great need to standardize these different numerations together. This is where Aryabhatta propounded two great rules, the rules of Navantaya Varga and the rule of the decimal place system. So Vargashrani, Varge, Vargashrani Katadmayah, Paddinavake Swara Nava, Varge, Vare, Navantaya Vargeva. So he said, let's use 2 times 9 or 18 places in a board. Okay. Let us first divide this 18 place board into Varga and Avarga places. Varga places are all places which are represented by the square root, by the even square roots of 10. So 10 raised to 0 becoming 10 becomes a Varga place. 10 squared becomes a Varga place. As you can see here, 10 raised to 4, 10 squared the whole square, 10 raised to 4 becomes a Varga place. 10 cubed the whole square, 10 raised to 6 becomes a Varga place. So on and so forth, we have the Varga places. All other 10s, 10 cube, 10 raised to 5, actually becomes an Avarga places. And then Aryabhatta says that Ekadasham cha shatam cha sahasram niyate, going up till Koti Arbuda Vranda Sthanat Sthanam Dashagunam. Go by the preceding 10 times in each and every place corresponding to the Varga and Avarga letters. So right from the units place to the 10 raised to 17 place, you can chart out the entire decimal system. This was the first rule of decimal numeration. It is very similar to a modern number system. So if you look at Aryabhatta system, the units place 10 raised to 0, the tens place and hundreds place fit 583 in that. 3 lies in the units place, 8 which is 80 lies in a tens place, and 5 which is 500 lies in the hundreds place. So this gave rise to the first concept that symbols can be used in particular positions, in particular places, and where they are placed in a position gives the value of that numeration. Now, Aryabhatta used a mapping system where he mapped the Varga letters to the first 25 numbers and Avarga letters to an increase in 10 times to those numbers, so right up till 100. Now, I'll not get into too much in technical details, but I'll just demonstrate an example. For example, in Aryabhatta's text, if you see a word such as G-R, right? G, as per the table, lies for 3. It is a Varga letter, and I have to place it in the place where R, the vowel, is being positioned, which is exactly 3 out here. And I place zeros in the empty boxes which are come after that. So effectively, I get 3 million from G, Gr. So here again, the concept evolved that 0 put in a certain place gives a higher value to a number which it is taking. So 3 becomes 3 million because of the positioning of zeros. Now, this concept was taken forward by Aryabhatta's disciples called Prabhakara. And the pre-Aryabhatta Brahmi numerals, which I was talking about, where there was a divergence, got synthesized into Aryabhatta's own numerals to get a 6th century numerals, which resembled our modern numerals to a great extent. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of mentioned. In the 9th century, just before the spread to Persia, Arabia, and Europe, the numeric system resembled what has been said here in the last column. And it is from here that the modern number system actually evolved. Now, I'm running out of time, so I'll just quickly go through the other kind of slides here. Now, based on these numeric systems, Aryabhatta also could propound several mathematical theories. Now, reminder theorem, calculation of pi, law of inversion, root factorization, the recursion, etc., the ratio proportionality, rule of 3. I will now focus only on 2 very important kind of laws. One is his law of inversion. Gunakara bhagahara ste bhavanti gunakaraha. So when gunakara, multipliers, become bhagahara, divisors, bhagahara ste bhavanti. When divisors can also become multipliers to give us the same result. Shepakshata viparito. That becomes a law of viparita or the law of inversion. Now, what does this mean? This means that if I have a certain result, how many different ways can I get that result out? Okay, to give you an example, 5 can be calculated as 4 plus 1, or it can be calculated by 6 minus 1, or it can also be calculated by me seeing what number multiplied by 3 divided by 5 plus 6 minus 1 gives us 5. So I can take that number as an x and represent what value. So here it comes to 0, because 3 into 0 divided by 5 gives us 6 minus 1 gives us 5. So different ways of approaching working backwards from an answer. Okay, this was a very important contribution of Indian mathematics to world mathematics per se. The Euclidean space of proofs had a hypothesis, but a hypothesis was not a finality, right? So I had to prove a hypothesis in a certain descriptive manner. In the law of inversion, I have a certain result, and I try to prove that result by looking at multiple different ways or operations of arriving at a result. This laid the foundation of unknowns and the foundation of algebra, which was later transmitted by the Arabs. Similarly, in the calculation of pi, Aryabhat posed a problem. He used the concept of inversion in forming different circumference and diameters of circles, and he commented in a sloka that add 4 to 100, multiply by 8 and add 62,000. The result is exactly the circumference of a diameter of 20,000. So we get the equation 20,000 pi is equal to 62,832. If we divide 62,832 by 20,000, we exactly get 3.1416, which was the most accurate value of pi till then. The earlier Greeks used 22 by 7, which comes to around 3.14, not so accurate, but 3.1416, the most accurate value of pi. Based on this, Aryabhat precisely calculated the circumference of Earth at around 39,500 kilometers, very close to the modern value of 40,000 kilometers. Now this concept of mathematics was first impacted the Greek convents of Syria. So it was in Keneshire that the first concept of mathematics and numeration was actually taken forward. Severus Sebokot of Nisibis was one of the phrase evangelists of this. Later in the 9th century, it became very famous in Persia under the famous polymath Al-Khwarizmi, in Arabia under Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Sabah al-Kindi, and finally it spread to Europe under Leonardo Bonacci. Now, all the details of this are actually given in my book, so I will just skip through this. Now, based on his framework, Aryabhat also postulated that there are vritas or errors and disturbances in outer space and uchchas, and each planetary motion is affected by two countervailing notions, countervailing forces: the Sigar Uchcha, or force which increases speed of a planet, and Manda Uchcha, force which reduces speed of a planet. Based on this concept, he ultimately calculated 3.5 corrections for the planetary to find out true orbits of the planet. So if you look at actually the Manda Uchcha and the Sigar Uchcha, Aryabhat's planets were not exactly circular. They were not concentric. So whatever the reference point, whether it be the sun or earth, was not exactly at the center. Secondly, because of the Manda Uchcha and the Sigar Uchcha not being constant throughout, the orbits got elongated, which in later years we actually called elliptical orbits. Heliocentrism, Aryabhat gives two theorems here. If you look at the Sanskrit shlokas on the left, calculations are both with Earth as a reference point and Sun as a reference point. Why Earth as a reference point? From the concept of trigonometry, Aryabhat gave extensive sine tables. It's very easy to use Earth as a reference point because you can use right angles. Exactly over me, I have a 90-degree angle being formed. I form a horizontal line to a movement of, let's say, a planet between a certain chord and a circle. I draw basically a half chord, and using trigonometric ratios, I actually calculated that sector or that sphere. So that's why Earth was useful. But Aryabhat also calculated the Sigra Uchcha, or the Sigra version of the planets with reference to the sun. This was taken centuries later by one of his followers from the Arya Paksha in Kerala called Nilkanta Somyaji, who actually proposed a quasi-heliocentric model where all planets excepting Earth revolve around the sun. This was the first time the sun as the center of the solar system could be mathematized. So there were earlier Greek astronomers who considered a possibility of a fire or a ball being at the center of the solar system, but it was mainly a descriptive hypothesis. The first mathematical representation of this was taken by the Arya Pakshas. Aryabhat also talked about several shlokas on the rotation of the Earth and the Earth being a circular sphere. I'll not get too much in detail of this. He was supported by the government of a day. So Buddhagupta Vikramaditya actually supported him in this theory. Now, finally, before I kind of conclude on these years basically, did Aryabhatta actually comment on gravity? There's a big debate among modern scholars. Okay, some scholars feel that Aryabhatta commented on gravity. Some scholars feel that no, this is all hogwash. We are reading too much into the Sanskrit. The reality is somewhere in between. There's only one Sanskrit shloka where Aryabhatta talks anything about the nature of the earth and its force. In that, he compares Bhanu, the Bhumi Bhumi Mer Dhir Bhuta Kamatascha. He compares it to a hitching post. What is a hitching post? A post which ties a horse together. Now, how do I interpret this shloka? Now, there are two ways of interpreting it. One, I can say that the hitching post is the earth, the horse are the objects to it, and hence there's a force which attracts the objects to stay on the earth, that is gravity. That is the way in which the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen also interpreted Aryabhatta proposing gravity. However, there are others who say that we are reading too much into this shloka. Actually, nowhere has Aryabhatta said that the objects of large mass will be attracted to the center of the earth. So we can't say that he's actually proposing gravity. Scholars like Sunil Khilnane actually hold his opposing. So I leave the debate open. But even leaving that aside, in terms of the sheer intellectual output, whether it be in terms of the space-time concept, the Kala Kshetra theoretical framework, standardizing rules for the numeration system, the mathematical formulation, or in his the cosmic disturbances and the orbital corrections, Aryabhatta was perhaps the first astronomer in human history to evolve these different concepts. Now, going forward, Aryabhatta was criticized severely for his works by his contemporary scholars. He therefore rebelled or went against the Surya Siddhanta school. He said that I have actually read the Vedas myself, and I will restore the true knowledge of the Vedas and form my own school, or my own Swayambhu school, called the Brahma Siddhanta school, the Swayambhu school, which later became known as the Aryapaksha. Now, Buddhagupta Vikramaditya supported him and made him the Kulacharya of the Kusumpura Ghatika, or the head of one of the Jyotisha schools in that period. This was a period when Subandhu was also experimenting with different literary techniques. Finally, between 498 and 505 CE, Aryabhatta wrote his magnum opus Aryabhattiya and released it to the world. Exactly in 499 CE, or 180 Gupta Samvat. Now, this was a time, unfortunately, 1 year later, when Buddhagupta Vikramaditya also passed away. This passing away of Buddhagupta Vikramaditya affected Subandhu greatly. And he explicitly mentions this death in his book, the Vasavadatta. And he says he was so struck by grief that in his grief, he wrote this great novel, Vasavadatta, which became a legendary classical novel in Sanskrit history. Finally, I've already told us later that the great intellectual conferences led to a standardization across sciences, across economics, across technology, across metallurgy, across architecture, etc. This led to a great transformation in the next 600 or 700 years. I will conclude with just a final 3-4 slides on the influence in other parts of Asia. If you see the painting below, it's a very interesting painting from the Liang period. This is about the Liang Emperor Wu explaining Sanskrit sutras to the Confucian scholars. Behind you find the statue of Buddha, and two among these are a great Indian scholar called Paramartha. Now, after Buddhagupta Vikramaditya passed away, one of his successors called Vishnugupta appointed another mentor to the Chinese court called Paramartha. This Paramartha was also appointed to the courts of Funan and the courts of China. Now, this Paramartha was a Mahayana Buddhist, but he also loved Lord Vishnu greatly. So in his translation of a Chinese text of Vasabandhu, he started off by talking about the liberation of Purushpara by Lord Vishnu and the destruction of the Rakshasa Indradhyuma in that. Now, this verse became very popular in Chinese, and this whole text was translated into Chinese several times. Now, Paramartha also brought the legend of Vikramaditya into China. So we find Paramartha also bringing in another concept called the Yogacharya. Now, the ancient school of yoga, a certain institution was established in the late 5th century, taking forward this yoga school, you call Yogacara. This Yogacara was also introduced by Paramartha into China. So a lot of influx of Indian ideas happened during this period. Similarly, in Korea, a huge amount of Sanskrit texts were translated in the late 6th century. Now, the Silla kingdom, which is one of the 3 kingdoms of Korea in this period, reorganized his military into an institution called as Hwarang Do. The Hwarang Do was reorganized on the basis of this Yogacara school. So this Yogacara school, which was then a Buddhist school of consciousness based on the ancient concept of Indian yoga, led to a reorganization of Korean military called the Hwarang Do. Similarly, in Japan, we had a huge influx of Indian ideas. You find the 9th century Daisho temple complex, and this is a statue of Kangni Ten, which is Lord Ganesh. We also find a great Indian scholar called Baraman Sojo, or Brahman bishop, who was there in Japan around the 8th century, who actually already found that the Japanese were conversant in chaste Sanskrit at that period of time. And this, the Japanese told him, actually began in the beginning of the Asuka period around 500 CE or 500 AD. So we again find a great influx of ideas happening. We also find Khosrow I, as I told earlier, in Persia, taking up several kind of ideas. There's a legend of Khosrow sending his physician Boreas Jha to India to actually get certain medicines and sciences, etc. Boreas guy went and told Khosrow that Bidpai or Vidyapati has advised Devasaram on certain ways to govern. If you govern that way, the Persia will be restored. Now, this philosophy of governance is nothing but the Panchatantra, which became famous as a very famous Perso-Arabic verse called Kalila wa Dimna, which is supposed to be the most popular work ever produced by West Asian literature. Now, in the 13th century, many of these ideas reached Europe through these Arabic texts and through these Arabic works. Now, between 1202 and 1270 AD, 4 great intellectuals, Leonardo Bonacci from Italy, Johannes de Sacrobosco, who was from the University of Paris in France, Alexander de Villedieu in France, and Petrus de Dacia, who was a Dominican friar, a Dominican monk who also had several scientific interests in Sweden. He's also considered to be the father of Swedish literature and in several aspects. So all these 4 got fascinated by the Indian numeral and Indian mathematical concepts through these Arabic texts. So it was virtually like geographically disparate regions in Europe at the same time getting very fascinated by these Indian concepts. This late, as we know, the movements in these kind of centuries finally led to several new concepts and ideas being introduced during the Renaissance period in Europe. So just to conclude, these 30 years were years of revivalism. They were where true essence of knowledge was sought to be revived. There were many other great dynasties, great mathematicians, great scientists in histories. We don't deny that. But the foundations of a new society in many countries of the world, in fact, the first step for the foundation of modern society can be traced in several evidences to these 30 years. These 30 years also led to the establishment of several institutions such as the Arya Paksha and the Gadya Slesha movement, which were institutions which lasted for 1,000, 1,200, 300 years. They are the longest running mathematical and literary schools ever experienced in human history. So what I've told, I'm sorry for taking time beyond my 1 hour, but what I've said is basically just a fraction of what is there in my book. If you want more details on all this or where my references or sources actually came from, please, you're free to access my book in Amazon, Flipkart, or Notion Press. I also will be happy to connect for any queries or feedback. I'm also on Instagram. My Insta ID is author_Venkatesh. Thank you for this, and I'm really apologize for overshooting my time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Rangan, for this very comprehensive presentation about your book. Your book is very detail heavy. So I recommend viewers to actually buy the book and read it as well. We don't have many questions, but one question that I wanted to ask you was, what inspired you to write this book?
Okay, so I'll. There were several reasons actually. First and foremost, is I would say my view on history itself. Now, there are generally two great theories in history which actually dominate, right? One is that history is a very linear progression or evolution of society. So what happens, our technology advances, our economy advances, we are much better off than what we were earlier. A second group of history would say that history is cyclical, that there were very advanced societies in the past. They fell and there was a rebirth of these societies. Now, obviously, if we assume history to be cyclical, and that's something which influenced me greatly, Now you have to find out those periods in history which actually led to a rebirth of societies. So then I started finding out that can I find such kind of periods in history. Now if you actually find that mathematics plays a very important role in the rebirth of societies, right? So something as simple as numbers lays at the foundation of all sciences, all mathematics, in fact, all literature itself. So in fact, so where did these numbers actually begin? And obviously they began in India, right? So how did these numbers originate in India and how did they actually influence larger society? So that became a great interest for me. Now I am a banker by profession, so economics is obviously also an interest area. So I also started seeing how did economics or the economic advancement be influenced by these kind of periods. So when I started researching, I actually got some very good manuscripts, and I should thank several people for this. So I got a very good manuscript of the Bhatta Siddhantika of Aryabhat from the Bhagwat Singh Ji and Man Singh collection in Mumbai, in the Rajabai campus. I also got a very good original manuscript of Subandhu from the Anand Ashram in Pune. So because I could access these kind of manuscripts, I got a lot of information, and that's how this book actually came across. So basically, my interest in the view of history, and also my interest in economics per se, combined with my access to information, resulted in this book.
Okay, great, great. Thanks a lot. I don't think we have time for more questions. We are already over time. I just wanted to let the viewers know that we plan to bring Mr. Rangan on a book tour to United States if possible. And we have a nonprofit, and you can donate to us for this cause. I'll put the Zelle ID in the chat, and also you'll receive it in an email. And if you donate, you will also get a tax exempt receipt by email. So I just wanted to let you know that. And thanks a lot, Mr. Rangan, again for this presentation. And hopefully, we'll get to see United States on an actual book tour and meet you in person as well.
Thank you.
And we'll also try to organize more events in the upcoming year. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks all the viewers.
Namaste.
Bye bye.
from baby. I think.
Absolutely phenomenal job, Banku. I see you chairing in a university in the US in the future. I'm totally waiting to read the book. Appa goes through it every day, and he has absolutely the best things to say about your work. Very original. I'm so glad you took up the subject when nobody else would. I really hope to see you tour the US and the world, literally, on a book tour. And the best of luck for your future, Banku. Phenomenal job.
Let me add my bit to what my son and my wife have spoken. You see, it was a kind of reinforcement of my own learning. I had read the very chapters that form the substantive portion of his presentation. The presentation is a summary of really some of the important chapters. So I could follow it with great joy and excitement that I was able to follow what he had spoken about. The book is more complicated when discussing Aryabhatta because it goes into mathematical portions in great detail. Today it was simplified and presented. No sacrifice of understanding. Understanding remains perfect and it is simplified. I predict a great future for this guy. He will head the chair of astronomy and mathematical sciences somewhere. The offer will come from India or from abroad, maybe from one of the American universities. They will vote to have him chair the subject of astronomy, mathematics, and literature, and the interconnectedness between all these fields in a matter of 30 years. So he has a great future ahead of him. I wish him the very best.
Bless him.
We wish him and bless him.
Yeah. Very proud of him.